Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com. Hey folks, today we're going to take a look at Helionox The Last Sunset from Zeroic Games and Mr. B Games. This is a competitive deck building game where you and the other players take control of these sort of generic sci-fi factions who are going at it to save their planets and things from events. It's slightly unclear, but the point is you're trying to get points, and you're doing this through deck building, but it's deck building in a bit of a unique way. There's also a spatial element to the game where, literally spatial, where you're moving around in space, different spaceships to different locations, and trying to overcome these events. Let me go ahead and give you a brief look at how the game is played, then we're going to come back, I'll let you know what I think. In Helionox The Last Sunset, 2 players or 3 or 4 players, if you buy a second set of the game, vie for dominance in a science fiction world with dying suns, robots, and bio people and cyber people, and science-y things happening. Honestly, I think the universe of Spaceman Spiff is explained in more detail than this game, so just don't stress it. Players are trying to get the most influence points by the end of the game, which occurs at the end of the turn in which the last event card is revealed. Points are gained by buying cards, using the special abilities on some cards, overcoming events, and controlling embassies on planets. There's also an optional missions variant that you can use, wherein 4 special faction goals are placed on the table. Any and all players can achieve these goals during the course of the game in order to get points at the end. Stuff like building 5 embassies or acquiring 7 cybernetic operatives. It's worth noting that the game can be played solo or cooperatively, but the changes are slight, so I will only focus on the competitive game for now. At the start of the game, you'll lay out the 5 locations: Earth, the Moon, Mars, the Asteroid Belt, and Europa. Make a stack of buyable cards for each of the 4 factions. Shuffle them, and flip the top card. Set the stack of prime assets next to these. Then, set up the events. You'll have 8 per player, plus 1 catastrophic event per player. These get divided into 3 decks. Finally, set up each player's personal stuff. You'll get a random architect, which is not as boring as it sounds, but close. They give you special abilities like drawing cards, gaining cards, or getting money, but you need to put the indicated cryo counters on them and wait for them to defrost before you can use their abilities again. Because space! Oh, you'll get a starting deck consisting of Sentinel prototypes and material assets, which give you defense and credits, respectively, the 2 currencies of the game. Added to your starting deck are 2 cards unique to your faction. Each faction has a different bent. Bio cards like to consume or destroy cards, cyber cards like to make it easier to get more operative cards, etc. Shuffle all 10 cards together and draw 5. You'll also get a ship token, some embassy tokens, and some cryo tokens. Influence tokens are gained as you gain points for various things. I'll start the main explanation by saying that this is a deck building game, and the premise is the same as many other deck builders. You start with an inferior deck of cards, buy cards during the game to make it better, etc. Helionox, however, does a few things differently. The piles that you buy from have only 1 card flipped up at a time, but once per turn you can cycle 1 card from 1 stack to the bottom to see a new card. The cleanup is much different. You can keep any unplayed cards in your hand at the end of your turn, or discard as many as you want. Then you draw 5, then you discard down to 5. You still reshuffle your discard to form a deck whenever you need to draw. Each player takes their entire turn before it passes to the next player. Each turn has 3 phases. The event phase is where, you guessed it, each player bids to see who gets to choose their magical athlete first. Oh, whoops, sorry, I've been drinking. During the event phase, what you'll actually do is put events at locations. Events that are inactive have a symbol telling you which location they go to, a defense cost you must accrue to overcome it, and a victory point bonus that you get for overcoming it. First, flip any inactive events that are already next to locations over to their active side. This will shut down a location and keep you from using its abilities, as well as potentially give you credit penalties to move your ship away from it. Next, draw the top card from deck 1 and place it next to the location with the matching symbol. Then when you've gone through deck 1, move on to deck 2, and so on. Catastrophic events are worse. When one of these comes out and becomes active, all locations are shut down, regardless of where it actually is. Also, each one will force each player who doesn't have an embassy at its location to lose 2 influence points. Next, the main phase. First, remove a cryo counter from your architect if you need to. You can't use their ability again until all the cryo counters are removed. Once per turn, you can use the location bonus where you are. If you have an embassy there, you can use the second key access bonus instead, which is usually much more powerful. At any time during your turn, any number of times, you can do any of the following. Play cards for their defense value or their credit value. Pay defense to take out an event. You play cards that give you a defense amount, and if you can meet or beat the number, the event is wiped out and you gain influence. Active events also have an alternative defeat condition, like discarding certain faction cards. You can also collaborate with other players at your location and split the influence points based on how much defense everyone contributed to the fight. Obtain any number of market cards or prime assets during your turn, as long as you can pay the credit cost. You can also move to a new location. You'll need to pay 2 credits unless you have an embassy at your destination, in which case it's only 1 credit. Finally, you can pay 2 credits to place an embassy at your current location. Each one gives you a point at the end of the game and unlocks the location's key ability for you. After that, you have the end phase as I described before, and you continue this until the final event is revealed. You finish out that turn, then count up all of your points. Whoever has the most is the winner. Now, on to my final thoughts.
Now, I want to say up front that I actually really appreciate what Helionox was going for here. I think that the unique deck building elements that it threw into the mix were very ambitious, as well as the entire idea of moving around to different locations with a spaceship tacked on to that deck building element. I thought that was a very ambitious idea, but I do think that this is a good example of what happens when a game's reach exceeds its grasp. While there's some individual components and things that I like about Helionox, overall, it feels like a bit of a boring mess. So let's start from the beginning. We'll talk about the theme, which is really generic. And the thing is, it's a deck building game. Deck building games aren't really known for having very strong themes. The ones that do have really strong themes really elevate themselves above the rest of the pack. When you think of a game like Mage Knight, which is more of something else other than a deck builder, but deck building is involved, or Marvel Legendary, which just does this whole complicated thing in order to bring the theme out as much as it possibly can. Now, the idea here is sound, where you're moving around spaceships, and it's a neat idea, and the artwork is fine, although uneven, but still, the theme is pretty tacked on. It really could have been a lot of other things, and there was no connection to the world for me. I made a smarmy comment in my overview about how generic everything seemed, and it's true. I don't really know. I have no connection to these factions or have any idea what's going on, why factions are mixing together in decks. It's a weird thing. So I'm not really sure what to make of it, and I think the theme is pretty forgettable. Like I said, the artwork's pretty uneven, but I think for the most part it looks okay. The rest of the components I wish were a bit nicer, and I think it's a bit of a fail that this game is not 4 players out of the box. Now, I didn't come down too hard on Star Realms for this, which I think is a very close comparison here, not just for deck building, but also the theme. But Star Realms, I'm a little more forgiving of Star Realms for only being 2 players with 1 pack, because the pack is very cheap and very small, and it makes sense for that. They were trying to get it down to as compact a thing as possible. Whether that's good or bad is entirely up to you. For this one, it's a meatier game. I mean, Star Realms is very quick. That's one reason why it's not so bad that you can only play with 2 right out of the box. But for this game, it's going to take a while to play. I think a game can be between 30 minutes and 60 minutes, and because of that, I think because it can be a meatier game that takes up a lot more time during a game night, having it be 4 players out of the box would be much, much better, especially since this is a problem going into the gameplay of the game. There's not enough cards in this game. There's just not. There's not enough cards in any of the market piles or cards, the unique cards that the players start with, even event cards. I wish there was more of, because in a 2-player box, there's only like 2 extra of the normal event cards, and then you only use 2 of the catastrophic events, but that means you're seeing the same ones over and over and over again, and they're not that different to begin with, and the artwork is even the same too. So I think that it does suck that there's not 2 is capable of being played with 4, and maybe if they had done it that way, they'd have a bigger emphasis on putting more cards, more unique cards into the box, because even now if you do buy 2 sets, you're just doubling up on the same cards, which is even more kind of vapid and pointless. So that's kind of a fail right there. But let's go on to the gameplay. I don't want to belabor the components and stuff too much, because the gameplay is what's both interesting and kind of a curse for this game here. Like I said, the deck building elements I like, because I like anytime I've played a ton of deck builders, I'm always looking for ones that sort of break and bend the mold, to give me a new experience. And I like some of the things that they did here. Not just buying cards going around top of your deck, but you go through your deck fast if you want to, because you're always keeping the cards that you want, discarding the ones you don't want, drawing 5, then discarding down to 5. And I like that. I like that you have a lot more control over what you get through your deck. But again, you have this total control over what you use to not do much out on the board because the market piles are so restricted. There's not that many cards to begin with, and you only have really 4 random cards to buy, and then the prime assets, which you'll end up buying a lot, especially if every stack has a really high cost card on top of it. You only get to cycle 1 card per turn, so that's a bit of a fail too. I think that's another unique thing they were going for, but that doesn't work quite as well as the whole drawing 5, discarding down to 5 aspect of the deck building in this game. As far as the events go, that's just a weird thing too, because it's very random. I mean, it's totally random where they come out, and when the catastrophic events come out, let me back up a minute, because a lot of the problems that I'm talking about with this game all stem from the same source. This game is filtering you down very specific paths to very obvious choices. There's things that you must do in this game to be competitive. You must do it, or you're not going to succeed. You must put out as many embassies as possible, regardless of whether you're using those achievement cards or not. If you're using those achievement cards, you absolutely must do that, because one of them is just putting out your 5 embassies. But it behooves you to do that anyways, because each embassy is worth a point, and the point spread in this game is very low. So you want to do that. You want to always have access to those key abilities. You don't want to get slammed for losing 2 points, depending on which random catastrophic event might come out and where it ends up. So again, that's like a null choice. You have to do these things. Because the market is so limited, certain cards that come out, you're just like, well, I'm either going to buy it or I'm not. I don't have a ton of options here. So there's, again, an obvious choice. And some of the cards are just way better than others. Cards that give you victory points, cards that are in and of themselves worth 2 or 3 victory points. Again, the point spread is not that big here, so it's like, yeah, I gotta go for that. Or cards that just have very obvious good abilities. There's other cards that have very, very specific abilities, like get an extra credit, but only to buy operatives. Well, what if there's no operatives on top of the stacks, or I don't particularly want it that badly? So again, obvious choices. Go for the power cards, forget the others. It kind of limits your strategy. Everyone always feels like they're doing the same thing, even though they have a couple of unique faction cards in each of their decks. The whole element of moving with space travel, it sounds like it could be cool, but really it's just a restriction. It's just, I have to pay 2 credits this turn because I need to move. That's it. The same thing with the events as well. Like, well, that's a lot of points. I can't give that up, so I have to go there and take care of this event, even though I really want those cards, but it's a null choice because I can't pass up that many points. I think the overall issue here is that the ideas in this game should be blown up into a much bigger game that has room to breathe. Because the idea is really sound of having a spaceship, going to these different areas and fighting these events and, wars that break out and, catering your deck to your play style to become either like this violent warrior or a merchant. Think of it as like, it could have been like a Zaya deck building game if you want to use that comparison. Or even, this is a terrible game, but Galactic Strike Force, as bad as it is, seemed like it had a better grasp of what it was trying to do, because it was this pretty expansive deck building game. Lots of cards, lots of different things you could do, tons of different cards to choose from. Everyone felt very unique, and that game had its own problems. But I think if this game had followed that path a little bit more and used some of the good things it had going for it, it would have been a much better game. Instead, everything feels restricted, from the fact that you can only play with 2 players and have to buy multiple sets of it, all the way up through the gameplay and the false choices that you have throughout the way. So cannot really recommend this one. Maybe if you're just really into the theme and you're, flush out of deck builders to try, you really love deck building and want something new, you might try it, but it's definitely a try before you buy at that point at least. But for me, definitely a pass. That is Helionox, The Last Sunset from Zeroic Games and Mr. B Games.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.